Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jenny Walker, and I'm an account manager with the Executive Education Department at the UFC Marshall School of Business. Today's webinar, Innovation, Converting Challenge into Opportunity, will be led by Professor Gerard Tellis, Professor of Marketing and Director of the Institute for Outlier Research in Business. We are happy to have you here today with us, whether you are joining us for the first time or have been with us during this ongoing webinar series that began in 2020. We encourage everyone to actively participate through our webinar by using the chat function to ask questions, react to content being discussed, or by simply listening. There will be a Q&A portion at the end of this webinar. Today's webinar will be recorded and emailed to you by next week. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Professor Tellis.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Welcome, everyone, and feel free to react to my presentation. It'll be with slides, and you may react by writing in the chat or raise your hand. And one of the organizers who's monitoring the chat will let me know if there is a question I need to answer. I don't have my chat button open. There are actually already 10 comments. So let me try to open it just in case. Okay, so let me start with the Tesla story, but not that its stock is roaring and you could or can make money on that. No, I'm going to tell you the untold story of Tesla. So in the 2008 recession, what began to be called the Great Recession, since 1928-30, there had not been as big a recession as in 2008. But as it turned out, in 2020, we had an even bigger one, pandemic, which I will talk about. The big incumbents, that is GM, Toyota, Ford, Volkswagen, they reacted to the drop in sales by offering promos, what we call promos, namely price cuts and deals and financing and things like that. There was a tiny company called Tesla in Silicon Valley, which was focused on lithium-ion batteries. And they were beginning to substitute automobile engines, which were gasoline-powered engines, with lithium-ion batteries. I had a board of innovator leaders in the US, actually globally. I had a board, I have a Center for Global Innovation, and I had an advisory board. And vice presidents of innovation and vice presidents of new products and R&D, research and development, were on that board. And I would make presentations to them every 6 months and tell them what's on the horizon. And in one of them, one of those presentations in 2008, I pointed to them the threat to incumbents, namely Ford, GM, Volkswagen, Fiat, and so on, of Tesla. And they said, oh, forget about it. Tesla, just forget about it. They said, the barriers to entry in the automobile industry are too high. There's been no US startup in a century. So since 1908, when our parents were probably kids, the last of the companies, Chrysler, whichever it was, Dodge, entered the market. And since then, there's been no other market. And they said, California is too expensive to manufacture. You cannot produce a car in California. Forget it. But they were not that polite. They were mean. Not all of them, by the way, a group of them from Detroit, the leaders from Detroit. And they criticized me severely. And then the California representatives and the ones from digital Silicon Valley supported me. So there was a split in my board. And mind you, these are all senior managers, vice presidents and presidents of research and development, R&D, new product innovation. Tesla struggled in the darkness for 7 years or 8 years. And then in 2015, Sales took off. And that is a momentous year. You'll see why. In 2020, the pandemic hit and everything moved digitally. Everything moved digitally, and people began flocking even more to Tesla, and its market cap took off. And its market cap dwarfed that of incumbents. So this is, as of today, Tesla's market cap. And then next you have Toyota, Volkswagen, Daimler-Benz, and so on, GM and all the others. And put all of the others together, they barely equal Tesla. This tiny startup in 2008, which the incumbents dismissed as impossible, is now the global leader and the market cap. And the lesson I want to point out here is know what to cut. There's this fascinating song, which I always love, Kenny Rogers, The Gambler. And if you've not heard it, please go back this evening. Don't review my slides or my notes. Listen to the song. And he says, you need to know what to cut. You need to know when to deal. You need to know when to stop dealing. You need to know when to run away, and don't count your money when you're sitting at a table. There's time enough to count. So you need to know what to cut. In a recession, you don't necessarily have to cut your innovation or your R&D or your advertising, but that's what companies do. And so the theme today is know what to cut. Okay, so what's the basis for my warning and insight? If I tell you today, oh, Tesla is a great company, and no, I didn't say it today. I said it in 2008. How would I know? I'm director of the Center for Global Innovation, and I do a massive amount of innovation. But one of the things I did way back from 2009 is analyze technology curves, the underlying curves of technology on which products sit. And this is the curve, the price of lithium-ion batteries. Lithium-ion batteries were made for laptops and cell phones and so on. But the price was dropping like everything in the digital economy. 2010, 2011, you can see that. And the orange is the price, and the blue is the percentage drop. And 2015, is the biggest drop, 35% in the price of lithium-ion batteries. And that's the year Tesla took off. That's the year when the cost of a lithium-ion battery fell below the cost of the fuel injection system gasoline engine. And that's what drove it. And that's the insight I got from analysis of technology curves. And the credit goes not to me, but to Martin Eberhard, who was dealing with cell phones for laptops and all that. And he said, if I put together 6,500 lithium-ion batteries, I get the power of a fuel injection system. And even better, I can go 0 to 60 in 3 or 4 seconds. Okay, so he can get a sports car with putting together your little lithium-ion batteries. He's the genius, not me. All I could do is calculate the cost curves. So we are stuck with a recession due to a pandemic. And this is unique because it's a massive shock. It's sudden. We couldn't have predicted. Who could have predicted it? The market was flourishing, zooming, booming. The GDP was exploding. The employment was at the lowest ever in Feb 2020. It affects all of us in every walk in life. There are many losers, but there are some winners. Tesla being one of them. And it's short-term and long-term. Now, the typical response in a recession is what the automobile companies did in 2008. Namely, they cut R&D and they cut the advertising budget because they expect sales to be down. Okay, and in an expansion, firms spend more on R&D and advertising because they expect sales to be up. Okay. So you say, yeah, this is common sense. This is what's happening in my firm. And I guarantee you it's happening in most of the firms because I'm constantly speaking with managers and they tell me that. And the reason this is happening is most firms budget by what we call the percentage to sales ratio. Namely, they look at their sales and they say, oh, I'm going to spend 3% on research and development. I'm going to spend 5% on advertising. And that's how they calculate the advertising or research and development budget. But this is like putting the cart before the horse. You want the horse before the cart. R&D or innovation dollars and advertising dollars are your horse. That's pulling the cart, which is the firm. That's pulling your sales. You need to put that in front. So you need to say, oh, what are my sales going to be? And to reach these sales, this is what I need. So here's an example of Coke versus Pepsi. And you see over time, this horizontal axis is the years and the vertical axis is advertising dollars. And you find that every time there's a recession, they cut back on advertising. Every time there's an expansion, they increase. And they're doing this lockstep. And therefore, they are using the percentage of sales method. And so if you use that method in recession, you will cut, and in expansion, you will increase. But the irony in that is that in a recession, your advertising dollars and your R&D dollars are going to be worth more, can be more effective. Why? Because the demand for talent or media are down. So your costs are down and the supply on noise is down, so it's more effective. It's down because everyone is cutting back. So you get twice the bang for the buck. So every dollar you spend on advertising, you get twice the effectiveness because other people have cut back and it's costing you less. And every dollar you spend on innovation, you get twice the effectiveness because other people are cutting back and the noise is less. So you want to do just the opposite. You want to invest more in R&D and invest more in advertising in a recession. Very tough, very counterintuitive, but that's, think of the Tesla story. In 2008, they were not cutting back. They were spending massively on R&D with no sales, literally no sales. They were borrowing money and spending because Eberhard knew what was going to happen. He was looking at the cost curve, just as I showed you. And then Elon Musk joined him, and then he was an even bigger gambler. Probably listened to Kenny Rogers more than Eberhard. He took over the company. He believed the Kenny Rogers, still believes, and then made a success of it. But that's not the only thing he made a success of. He's dabbled in 6 completely different industries, in 6 completely different verticals, and he's making a success. He's made a success of 4 of them: PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, and now he's got Hyperloop, and I can't even keep track of the number of things he's into. The gambler. So the better approach to budgeting is objective and task, where you set up a sales goal, say, I'm going to sell this much in this year. And then you go back to the funnel and say, for this sales goal, I will lose this much in ideation, I will lose this much in prototyping, I will lose this much in market testing, and therefore I would need this much R&D budget. Okay, so you're going through the funnel. There's a funnel by which ideas get screened and only a few are prototyped. Prototype gets tested and screened and only a few of them launch. And launches fail and only one of them is a success. Likewise, for advertising, you set up a sales goal, then you go through the funnel of awareness, liking, intent, and each of these stages, ad dollars is getting screened out. You spend a lot of money, but only some people are aware, and only some people like, and only some people have an intent to buy. And based on that, you develop your advertising budget. So this is called the objective and task method of budgeting. Uh, so you strategically innovate or advertise in a recession when costs are down and noise are down. So let's look at this pandemic. There are winners and losers, and there's the short term and the short and long term. So who are the big winners in the short term? There's pharma and makers, manufacturers of PPE, personal protective equipment, masks and both the cloth, the fiber ones as well as the glass ones, and the full suits and so on. Cleaners and sanitizers making a fortune. Home gym equipment, it's what now? 11 months since the pandemic, and I was trying to buy some weights for my son, and they're not available. Nothing is available. And the few things that are available are extremely expensive. Carry-outs, food services, home office equipment, alcoholic beverages. So, you can't go to the bar. So you raid your home bar, and you have more time on your hands and you're more depressed or whatever. And so alcohol consumption has gone up. And casual clothing manufacturers, I see most of you who have come online are casual, and I have been dressing casually. The losers are restaurants, stadiums, halls, museums, gyms, parks, beaches, and recreations. And some of the cities, which all of their money came from boardwalks, have had to shut down. And the cities are in serious trouble. They don't have money for their usual activities. Physical schools and universities, including our own university, USC, barely making ends meet. Medical service providers, because people are not going, aside from COVID, they're not going to the hospitals or the dentists or whatever. So the usual providers of medical services are suffering. Real estate owners and services, so that is turning around. Makers of formal dress outfits. Then you have the short and long-term winners, digital products. All digital products are doing well, okay? Because we need them more since we cannot deal with the physical world. So even sales of laptops and computers, which are going down, have shot up, and sales of monitors, big screen monitors and so on, have all gone up. And Tesla, by the way, gasoline prices have gone down to the lowest level. So you think people would buy gasoline automobiles? No, but they're going to electric because Tesla is not really an electric car. They're going digital. Tesla is a digital car because everything is voice and touch controlled. There's very little physical control except for a lever, and perhaps even that may be voice controlled, except for a single lever button you press or move to go into gear or to go into park. Everything else is voice and touch control on a huge screen. And that's what people want because there's very little maintenance for electric cars, very little people interaction. And in a pandemic, that is the safe choice. Online retailers, there was a massive move to online retailing, and it just went overboard during the pandemic. Online grocers, networking equipment and services, streaming services, online news and entertainment, online education. So all of our big universities with these gorgeous, beautiful campuses, what's going to happen to them in the next decade or two? Okay, they might become museums. And then the long-term losers, cruises and tourist services. Can you ever imagine being locked up on a cruise liner with 3,000 passengers? Can you imagine that day coming again? Gasoline engine autos and trucks, because the gasoline engine is completely full of maintenance. And each time there's maintenance, you have to meet people, you have to touch people. Each time you fill gas, you have to touch that thing as opposed to a digital car you can fill at home. Mass transit equipment and services, brick and mortar retailers, movie theaters, airlines. Okay, so what should the strategy be? For winners in the short term, you need research and development to expand the product portfolio, to expand manufacturing. You have to manufacture on a much bigger scale, and you have to make things available quickly. So one of the things Tesla, they had the technology, but what they didn't have and what was taking time to manufacture, to master, was manufacturing on a massive scale. So they have open plants in Europe, in China, in Australia. They have a massive battery operation. In the Arizona desert, they have another massive battery manufacturing and so on. The losers need to pivot. This is the short-term losers. There's something for everyone in the pandemic. Restaurants can go to food delivery, hotels to housing, housing for the homeless, stadiums to testing, screening, vaccine sites, and formal wear to casual wear. It's I took my first shot. I'm over 65, by the way, and I got my first shot, and I got it at the Forum. And I was very impressed. It's like a military operation. I was in and out in half an hour and 15 minutes because of the mandatory waiting period. But they had 12 lanes. So the Forum, which was useless for games and so on, now become a vaccine site with 12 lanes. And I'd never had to step out of my car. Short and long term. So R&D, innovation, for new tech platforms. So, the obvious ones here are apps. Almost every service provider and every manufacturer can think of an app that makes life easier for customers. Emerging technologies. So now it's smart everything. And I've reached the 50% point in my house in terms of smart switches, smart thermostats, smart timers for my lawn, and so on. But there are a few more things to do, like the refrigerator and so on. So those are the emerging technologies. Another emerging technology, this is LG, the manufacturing company in Korea, recently got in touch with me. And they said, we have this new technology, folding screen, should we introduce it? And I said, I looked at it and so on. And I said, of course, both for start with cell phones and tablets, but then ultimately for TV, because what I can see in another 5 or 10 years, especially for big events like the Super Bowl, which is around the corner, that you would have this big LED TV, but it's actually the technology is QLED. And then you press a button and it rolls up and it's gone after the game and you're having fun and entertaining. And you press another button next day and it comes down and so on. So rolling QLED screens. LED stands for liquid crystal, liquid LCD, LED, electronic display, and QLED, I can't get that word. And then the long-term new product rollout. How are you going to, over time, make this possible? Then for the long-term losers, you just have to think of transforming the product portfolio. Those huge, massive cruisers, 3,000 cruisers, I mean, yeah, you could turn them into museums like the Queen Mary in Long Beach. Or you can think of leapfrogging. Okay, I missed that generation. Let me think a generation ahead. So the new technology, new tech platforms that are coming up, the new technologies that are coming out. Okay, so likewise for advertising, for winners, you need to advertise to increase the awareness of product, price, location, brand. You're booming, but people don't know all the things that you can do. For losers, adapt the product portfolio, and then you have to advertise to increase awareness of the new offerings and gain acceptance of the new line. So we have an Italian deli next to my home, and they were really hurt by the pandemic, and it took them several months, but then they switched to home delivery, and now they just have to tell people, yeah, we can deliver your Italian meal, candlelit meal if you like, at home. And for short and long term, for winners, you have to advertise to build loyalty, brand equity, line extensions, and brand extensions in the future. And for long-term losers, you have to advertise about the transform portfolio, inform consumers, and extend the brand equity to the new portfolio. Okay, also in the media strategy, reevaluate the traditional media. So the world is moving to digital and refocus on digital media. I have a case when I teach one of my classes of Trump versus Clinton, the 2016 election. And Clinton spent $300 million on TV. Trump spent very little. He spent 90 million on Facebook, and Clinton spent nothing on Facebook. And the little money he spent, he could test the results immediately because each of the ads had a fundraising call to action, because you cannot vote every day during the canvassing period, but you can donate. And from that, his campaign manager realized weeks before that they were going to win the election, because in the toss-up states, he was getting that critical response to the ads. People have not realized still the power of digital media over traditional media. So we need to constantly reevaluate traditional media and refocus digital media on the, think of toss-up states. You don't want to bombard the whole market. You just need to target to the toss-up customers out there who are likely to make a difference. That way, you're much more efficient in targeting your money. And reassess cost effectiveness, how much I'm getting. Just as in the Trump campaign, they had a call to action to donate in the interim, and they could assess the cost effectiveness of their campaign. In the content of the advertising strategy, you need to be sensitive to hardships and losses of jobs and loved ones. So this can be in the appeals, in the choice of endorsers, in the brand names you choose, and in the symbols. So, certain brands like Corona are not blessed with the best of names for a pandemic caused by a coronavirus. So all of that sensitivity has to be taken into account. And the motive in all of this should be to uplift rather than to offend. So I have a book, How Transformative Innovations Shape the Rise of Nations, which talks about these critical points like pandemics and massive recessions, how one country past another country by adopting the new technology, the emergent technology, instead of the existing standard technology, and how they struggled in the shadows to do this. And if Jenny or whoever's controlling this meeting gives me a few more minutes, I can tell you one or two stories from there. And I have another book, Effective Advertising in Social Media, which tells you about how to budget in the objective and task method or the experimental method instead of the simple percentage of sales, which in times like this is obsolete. So I have a website, gtellis.net, worldwide at gtellis.net. Many of these ideas and papers are available there. And thank you very much for coming. I think we'll open it up to Q&A. Jenny, are you looking up the Q&A? So would you like to tell me which question I should take first, or
No one
ask?
thus far. We've just had comments on your content, so we can open it up. And if folks would like to unmute themselves and ask questions, feel free to do so.
Go ahead, guys.
I do have a question that popped up in the chat from Patricia.
Yeah.
How do you see the multicultural opportunity?
Oh, pardon me?
How do you see the multicultural opportunity?
Oh, I think the strength and the beauty of the U.S. is its multicultural diversity and multi-ethnic diversity. And at times like this, when a nation is in shock by an exterior event, in this case, the pandemic, the mixing of cultures is a fertile ground for innovation. So it may just happen that certain cultures, for example, and this is just an example, have certain foods that they consume on a regular basis, but in a pandemic, they might be particularly suitable for preparation and consumption, whereas other foods which are, suitable at other times may not be suitable now. People have more time at home, and so they can invest in cooking. And so meals that require elaborate preparation, which previously we couldn't do because we were leaving offices at 5:30, reaching over at 6:30, exhausted, and we had no time to cook. So, take anything and toss it together and eat. Whereas now you could relax at 5 and spend a whole hour cooking. So multi-ethnicity and multicultural in a context provides fertile grounds for all sorts of innovations. I just gave a narrow example of food. And by the way, Elon Musk, who's now become the richest man in the world for his innovations, is not a US native. He was not born in the US. He was born in South Africa. And he said, when he was 18 or 19 or 22, I don't know, and he said, I can never realize my radical views of this world in this country. I need to go to the US, and probably I need to go to California, where all the weird people are, and maybe I'll be welcome. And that's how he ended up here. So yeah, great time for weirdos, mavericks, people of different perspectives, of different cultures. I hope I answered that question.
We have 4 or 5 other questions.
Yeah.
Asking, so after this question, Derek has his hand up as well. But the first question is, how does this impact small businesses right now? What guidance can you give?
Well, I think small businesses are in a great opportune moment, because the incumbents, the existing closest firms, have so much baggage in equipment, in manufacturing, in products, in inventory, that they are handicapped. And so the small firms have little of this inventory, and they are easiest to, they are in the best position to maneuver and change things around. So I think much of what I said, they can apply with far less resistance and far less difficulty than can the huge incumbents. And then you remember in 2008, 12 years back, Tesla was a struggling startup, which the incumbent firms, Detroit and the other ones in the Midwest and North Carolina, all dismissed as impossible. No company started in California could be a success in the automobile industry because of the barriers to entry and the high cost of manufacturing in California. So if they could do it, any of you small businesses can do it. But think of these issues, I said. So the big starting point is look for new technologies, new opportunities, emergent platforms, and that's the basis for innovation.
Derek, you had your hand up.
Sure. I actually did put it into the chat as well, but my question was really more around sort of the hotels, hospitality, and events business, and just curious if you had any perspective on that model versus, say, the Airbnb and VRBO models going forward.
You said the restaurants,
hotels and hospitality business. Obviously, they were one of the ones that were on the loser panel earlier. Just curious if you had any perspective on how they're going to be doing going forward versus, say, Airbnbs or the VRBO gig model.
Correct. The gig model or digital model is more decentralized and more digitized, and therefore was much better positioned to handle it. Whereas the hospitality had these huge investment properties. But all of that can change. And in the current environment, I would say the best opportunities for them are in terms of it's not as lucrative, but it's more reliable because the supply of income will come from government agencies and medical agencies. So they could move to hosting sites for testing. All sorts of tests need to be done for vaccines, and it's going to be there for a long time for hosting of doctors and physicians. So every now and then, someone in the family gets gets a positive test for the disease, and then members have to isolate or quarantine. So one thing is for these people to quarantine in hotels. So if they can reorganize the hospitality business to either host people or events in a hygienic way, or to provide food in a hygienic way, there's opportunities. I'm not saying any of this is costless or easy, but there are opportunities.
Thank you.
All right. The next question is, how can luxury brands succeed during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's funny. I was just reviewing ads, and a whole bunch of examples came of luxury brand labels on masks. So you've got all sorts of masks now, where the inside is your technically good mask, but the outside is all fancy fabrics, logos, labels, and other things. Similarly, casual clothes were always casual, but by clever design or using clever technologies, example, Lululemon, you can make a casual become fancy. And, some of the brands were already doing this. So last Christmas, I got for one of my gifts from one of my kids, an $80 or $100 pair of slacks for the gym. I said, why do I need this? I just wear my old jeans to the gym. They said, oh no, it's, wicker, whatever this, wicks away sweat and this and that and stretches, it doesn't scratch and so on. But then I realized I was using that last fall for classes because it was comfortable and everyone is relaxed and so on. So lots of opportunities for branding, even for luxuries. I went back and looked into the Lululemon and the Nike, and in many of these products, which were super comfortable and became casual, but also for the gym and so on. But they're very expensive because at the root is not only superior design, which makes the wearer look classy, but also a superior technology, which provides extra comfort, wicking abilities, and so on. So even for luxury brands, lots of opportunities.
All right.
By the way, I'm looking to my right because when I was teaching last fall, I bought this huge 34-inch LCD curved monitor so I could see everyone's face in the class. And I'm able to see all your faces now. And so I'm looking at the beauty before me and not at my camera. I've not figured out how I can get a camera in the middle of this monitor, but if any of you figure that out, please let me know. Okay, the next question.
All right, we have 19 minutes and we have a flurry of questions. So Raymond would appreciate your feedback on future of oil and gas companies and possible impacts of working remotely.
Yeah, I mean, that is such a blessing because the price of oil came down. I mean, I can understand the people working there are put to great hardship, both workers as well as the owners. But for the whole republic, it was a huge blessing because the stranglehold that these oil countries had on the world economy, you know, Russia, Venezuela, the Middle East, Nigeria, that has been broken almost permanently with the drop in price. So I sympathize with those working in, but there is a bright future. You know, this way, the oil may no longer be useful for gasoline engines. I may not be used also for gasoline engines, but oil is a very rich, petroleum, let me say, the raw material is a very rich product. And from that, we got all of our plastics, the plastic revolution, and who knows, so many other revolutions. So researchers, it's a time to invest in research and development. We can think of new fuels which are less polluting, new products like the plastics, which are easily broken up and don't survive in the environment for decades, and so on. So petroleum doesn't have to be translated always only into gasoline. There are a whole bunch of other products that can be made from it. So I would say the tremendous opportunity to invest in research and development and think of new fuels and new products from the same old petroleum.
All right, Kelly would like to know, do you see universities moving to a hybrid model, digital and on campus?
Yeah, I'm lucky that I'm old and not young, because if the university model collapses, I can just quietly retire and I don't have to worry about my job. But universities are really threatened. But there's one silver lining, and that is what I saw last fall, that students had the option, and especially undergraduate students, of working from home because all the classes last fall at USC were given remotely or online, so they could just stay at home. But a large number came to campus. And why is that? Because the education is not only in the professor's lectures or in the classroom. The education is in the living together. So you learn from, sharing with someone from a completely different background. You bump into so many people from so many different cultures. You have 4 years together, not to speak of the nightlife and the weekend life, not all of which is healthy, but there is that. And so students were missing out on all that, and they still came to campus. So the universities would be white elephants if not for what they also offer is the living experience. It's an experiential thing. The reason why theaters lasted long after there were tapes and CDs and DVDs and even streaming, the reason theaters lasted is because the experience you got of taking your date out, having a popcorn and a beer and sitting in that room with 15 or 20 speaker surround system was immeasurable. So it was an experience that they provided. So universities may still survive if they can highlight this experience and lower the costs. That experience is great, but is it worth $55,000 in tuition. Also, there is this big talk about switching the model of education. In the old time, it was I lectured, and then you took notes, and I gave you a problem and you solved it at home. Now the model might be I put the lecture on YouTube, you view it, and then you come to the classroom and then you ask questions of how that lecture didn't gel with your knowledge and background. And what we discuss in the classroom it's just Q&A. So you bring problems and questions and we solve them in the classroom.
Okay. Roberto said there are some industries where be present is necessary. I mean, you need people in the job site. You cannot do it remotely. For example, construction. How do you see the future of this industry, considering the innovation rate of construction has been usually slower than others?
Yeah, everything which people said you must do physically, it turns out you can do digitally. So heart surgery, take that, heart surgery, or brain surgery. You have to be there, right? No, but now there is technologies which are so accurate and they can be controlled digitally and by the surgeon, so that the surgeon can be in Bangalore in India, and he's operating these machines via the internet, and the patient is in Toronto. And Canada has been ahead of the US here in allowing for this remote surgery and so on. So things can be done if surgery can be done remotely. I mean, building long back had moved already to a prefab model where things were built on factory floors and then just shipped and installed at the location. And robots have been there from, I think, 30 years back, and they're getting more and more powerful and more flexible. So even manufacturing is getting more and more robotic. So lots of our world can be moved digitally, but probably I'm exaggerating, and please throw me some examples that refute what I'm saying. But I'm thinking everything is possible. There are technologies still emergent which can address all the problems of the physical world, or most of the problems of the physical world. The one thing that is difficult to replicate is experiences, but even there with live Zoom calls and curved screens and high resolution cameras and high resolution monitors, even those experiences can be pretty well replicated. Touch cannot be though. Okay, next question.
All right, Craig says, Mr. Tillis, you are spot on with your analysis for a brand not to turtle during a downturn or soft time. Focus should always be on the longer game. Would cost 2 times to capture what you would lose by pulling too far back. That being said, in your opinion, why is it that a CFO does not see this?
Yeah, that's the problem. That's the perennial problem. The perennial tension I have, I see when I talk to CEOs, that the marketing department tends to be risk-seeking, venturesome, and unwilling to gamble because they are more focused on customers, they are more aware of emerging technologies, and they are more tuned to the future. CFOs, by their training, have at the end of the day to balance the books. They cannot end the year, or they don't want to, or they're not incentivized to end the year in the red. So they December 31st or April 30th, whenever the books have to be balanced, they have to be balanced. And so they are far more reluctant to gamble. They are more about balancing than about venturing. and the marketing department is more about benching, I hope at least, than about balancing. But I think in every organization, you want this healthy tension, right? You don't want every department to be venturesome, because then the company will take on unreasonable risk and could collapse based on hasty or ill thought out risks. So you want this tension, and good for them. But that's what I tell my students. If you're in finance, that's okay. You'll play by the books and you'll want to balance the sheets and this and that. But if you are in marketing, it is your mission and your role to be enterprising, to look to the future, to be willing to gamble, to look to emerging technologies and products.
All right, I'm going to take, after this question, I'm going to take two more questions and then we'll wrap up. So this question is, how does, from Cervantes, how does a business education like USC Marshall shall innovate themselves to be more relevant and competitive, surely address the customer's needs?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
So how does business education like USC Marshall shall innovate themselves to be more relevant and competitive, surely address the customer's needs?
Yeah, fortunately, they started. There were people who were visionary at USC Marshall, and we started online classes. Tim might know, he's here, or others in the organizing committee. We may have started 10 years back, and we were already moving to this model. So we were not caught flat-footed. And I was returning from New York at a meeting in New York, and I was organizing a conference on the 12th of March. And on the 10th of March, I got an email that said from a guy in London, "Are you surely hosting this conference?" And Monday evening, whatever that was, 10th of March, I said, "Yes, sure, we are hosting that conference." And Tuesday evening, we got an email from the president saying that all conferences are to be shut down. USC is going to shut down this week, and we are going to move to Zoom. And the only reason that we could have pulled that off with 24 hours notice is that the university was moving in this direction years back, maybe as much as a decade. So that's the issue about where we started, about emerging platforms and emerging technologies. In 2008, the leaders of Ford and GM laughed at the idea or scorned at the idea of a Tesla being successful based on lithium-ion battery that's built in California. That was so absurd in their minds. And that's the example I want you to go home with. What in the world made them so confident that nothing in the automobile world could come out of Silicon Valley? But that is the land of future technologies. So the way out of this pandemic and the way out of future problems like this is to be vigilant of emerging technologies and emerging platforms and emerging new products, not merely 1 or 2 years ahead, but 12 years ahead. So what Tesla imagined in 2008 came to full fruition in 2020.
Perfect. Steve's question is, there are many platforms to refocus digital strategy. To name a few, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google. How should an institution leverage limited resources and reposition for quick results through digital campaigns?
Yeah, the thing is experimentation here. And I think there's no point to put all your eggs in one basket. And if the choice is between Facebook and Google search and LinkedIn and so on, great, because the minimum in each of these platforms is very small. So it doesn't hurt to experiment. I don't want to be overly focused on one example, but some of the politicians or the political campaigns were running 1,000 experiments a day on Facebook. So you don't have to run 1,000, you can just run a dozen experiments, because the minimum, unlike a TV ad, the minimum is very little. So just experiment and experiment, and learn by doing, learn on the job.
Perfect. And the last question is from GW. So do you see theaters, stadiums, large spaces transforming themselves?
Do I think they are?
Do you see them transforming themselves? Theaters?
Yeah, I think they will, very slowly, and it'll be more push than pull. So the transition to what's it called, to making the stadiums into vaccination sites, into testing sites. I could be wrong here, and someone in the audience correct me, please. But the push came not from the stadiums themselves, but the push came from the governments. They said, we have this urgent need. How can we mass test thousands of people a day, or mass vaccinate thousands of people a day? And they said, no better place than the stadium. So I think the push came from the governments rather than the pull from the organizations themselves. But I think the change will come, either to pull or to push. The change will come.
All right. And last question is, speaking of Silicon Valley, with its high cost of living and growing constraints surrounding cost of living and quality of life, can we assume that it may be a loser and the other geographic areas will emerge as Silicon Valley version 2.0?
Great question. And the answer is yes, absolutely. And that will take me to two other points. Namely, there is a beautiful interview of Jeff Bezos when he was the richest man, and Amazon was booming. This was about 2 years ago, a CBS interview. And they said, so what's the future of Amazon? And, right enough, the Congress of the US and the state governments are looking to break up and to control Amazon and Google and Facebook. And Jeff Bezos said very humbly, Amazon will die one day, and Silicon Valley will die one day. So it's foolish for anyone to assume they will be there forever. And that's one example from my book, and which I wanted to start with, but we're short of time, is how Venice became a museum. At one time, Venice was the capital of a huge empire stretching from Spain to Istanbul. What was now Istanbul, that time was Constantinople. They even conquered Constantinople, and they were at the cutting edge of technology, but it was an ore technology. They were building ships, one a day at their peak, which were run by oarsmen, 100 at a time. And a little country called Portugal, a poor country on the west coast of Europe, was investing in the new technology, sails, and they built a ship that could sail around the tip of Africa and reach India. And that was Vasco da Gama's ship, and it was on 3 sails. And those were the ships on which Christopher Columbus came to the Americas. The new technology triumphed. Sails became the dominant technology for the next 100 or 200 years until we got steam. And Venice became a museum. Portugal became an empire which lasted, and Spain, which lasted 100 years. Then the Dutch displaced them. Then the English displaced the Dutch, and so on, all on new technologies. So no one should assume that success will last forever.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Tellis. So on behalf of the USC Marshall School of Business Executive Education team, I'd like to thank Professor Tellis and all of you for your time spent with us today. This is just a taste of what USC can offer through our open enrollment courses or customized programs for organizations. Have a wonderful rest of your week. And as we say at USC, fight on.